if you know anything about Hinduism or Indian religions at all, you would understand to be an absolute oxymoron, but something that they referred to as Hindu orthodoxy. And that orthodoxy is now being, in many ways, firmly implanted upon the secular state itself. So, religious nationalism, be it Hindutva or Messianic Zionism or Christianism or Islamism, is not just a universal phenomenon, but it is on the rise, it is surging everywhere. We can have a larger discussion as to why that is. It's kind of a little bit of a complex scenario. Partly it has to do with the failure of secular nationalism, the very political ideology upon which the entire 20th century was predicated, right? The great promise that if we just simply subsume our religious or ethnic identities, if we implant a national identity above that, if we decide to create a collective identity based not on common religion or common ethnicity or common race, but rather on geographic location, rather on a agreement among free and equal citizens about certain civic duties and responsibilities, if we can just do that, which was the promise of the Treaty of Westphalia, right? If we can just do that, then we will usher in a period of peace and prosperity. And of course, the result was the most violent, the most murderous century in human existence, the 20th century, and 2 wars that were fought not because of religion, not because of race, not because of ethnicity, but because of nationalism. 2 wars that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people. The kind of death that, you know, a violent religion can only dream of. And of course, that resulted in a general distrust, particularly in parts of the world in which nationalism itself was such a late phenomenon and so often imposed by outsiders with arbitrary borders and fabricated nationalities. It's no wonder that nationalism itself, secular nationalism, is beginning to fade away, and that what is rising in its place is some of these more primal forms of identity, like religion, like ethnicity. And if you're going to continue to ascribe to the very concept of the nation state, then what you are going to assume should replace secular nationalism is probably religious nationalism, ethnic nationalism. So there's many reasons for the surge of religious nationalism, but the important thing to understand for our conversations is that this is by no means a uniquely Islamic phenomenon. Nor, by the way, is it necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it depends, I think, on how you think about it, but insofar as talking about the global peace and prosperity that we're all hoping for and striving for, the question is does religious nationalism either foster or hinder that kind of global peace and security? There's a lot of different opinions on this, but I think that what's important to understand about religious nationalism, and Islamism in particular, is that it wants something very specific, very concrete. If you're Hamas, your agenda, your goal, your ideology stops at the borders of historic Palestine. You are a nationalist organization. If you're Hezbollah, your ideology, your goal, your agenda is deeply rooted in Lebanese nationality, in Lebanese nationalism. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has no interest in what's taking place with the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, because they are both nationalist organizations. They have spent an enormous amount of time and energy and effort branding themselves as nationalist organizations. It's just that their conception of nationalism is predicated on the idea that the state should be defined by Islam, whatever that means, and that the laws should be grounded in Islamic law, whatever that means. By the way, I say whatever that means because it's never actually worked. No one has ever actually managed to make the Islamist dream a reality. There is not a single state in the Middle East or anywhere in the world in which Islamism has actually succeeded in founding a state in that regard. That doesn't mean that Islamism hasn't been successful politically. Hezbollah is a perfect example of this. 5 years ago, it was a terror organization. Today, it's the second most populous party in the parliament. It is actually in the midst of power-sharing agreements with its historic enemies. So whether you continue to label it a terror organization or not, I don't care either way. You cannot ignore the fact that it is, if anything else, a legitimate political actor in Lebanese politics.